Well, welcome everyone. This is our DEKALB Asgrow current agronomic topics session for September 14th. Took a little break once we got towards the latter part of the growing season, but we're going to start them back up again. Ideas to go here for really the next couple months or through harvest or as long as we need to talk about what we're seeing and also what you're seeing out there in the fields. And of course, once we get into harvest, then we'll be able to give some updates that way.
Yeah, it's definitely good to be back. Yeah, if anybody has any questions throughout our presentation, please ask.
Yep, as usual, we do want to let you know we are recording it, but you can ask questions through the chat or come off mute. But with that, we're gonna jump right in. Start with a little GDU update. Always like to start there, and mainly, at this point we're talking about black layer projections. Of course, GDU is still running well ahead of average for pretty much all the planting dates, but just for Clay County projections on black layer for a couple different maturities on the 28th of April planting date, as you can see there, looking at the 15th and the 19th of September. And I can guarantee those projections are wrong. So I always like starting out with the first slide that is absolutely not accurate. But I bring it up because the projections, are based on what's been happening. And then really the projections are, I've noticed on this website that we've used all year, they tend to predict an earlier black layer date. And we have slowed down on GDU accumulation really over the last month or so compared to what we did have, especially in our June timeframe. A lot of our GDU accumulation where we got ahead of schedule was the early part of the summer. But it's a good thing that we've slowed down in the black layer timing. I personally haven't seen anything that's black layered other than because of stress. So in other words, where we've got premature death or we've got light ground where things have shut down, obviously there's black layer there. But on good heavy ground, as far as what I would call the natural black layer, I'm seeing some hybrids that are getting close, probably within 5 days here. But for the maturities that were showing there, 103, 105, we're probably looking at more like next week for a 28th of April planting date.
Yeah, I'd agree on that as far as the black layer piece. In my neck of the woods too, the stressed areas definitely are there. But that heavy black ground has a little bit to go.
And just as an example of that, I'm sure some of you are doing some hand shelling and looking at what type of moistures things are running. I know in the cases I've heard about, there's corn with hand shelling that's again on light ground and been dead for a little while that I've seen 16% at the lowest. Obviously with the hand shell, you're probably 2 points at least lower than what the combine would say. But even on some ground that's I would say decent, or maybe not the best ground, but at least stuff that still has a little bit of green. Even there, I've heard of some moistures that are in the low 20s. So surprisingly low for really not really having maybe that natural black layer. Sometimes that stuff that dies prematurely, doesn't go through the normal dry down. But I think we've got a lot of open husks. We've got a lot of brown husks, and so we really are seeing harvest or hand shelled moistures much drier than expected for the 14th of September. And then along with that is just the stress degree days. This gives us a little bit of a snapshot on what the year has been like. And I just picked out Sioux Center for the last few years. So, this year it's well over 300 on stress degree days. And remember, stress degree days are just the measure of days that are over 90, or excuse me, over 86. So if we have a 90-degree day, that's 4 stress degree days. Compared to last year at this time, we were at 210. 2 years ago, 139. Going back to 2012, which of course was one of the hotter years in recent memory, We were higher with 350 stress degree days. General rule of thumb, and this is a very loose rule of thumb, but if we're above 140 stress degree days, that can mean below trend line yields. Well, obviously that was not the case last year. We were well above 140 and still had excellent yields. So much of this is all about when that stress comes. Is it before reproductive stage? Is it when we've got a full moisture profile? Are we getting 90 for just an hour out of the day? Do we have a 40-mile-an-hour wind with it? All those factors come into play. So it's very rough, but I do like looking at it because it puts it in perspective as far as the amount of heat that we've had. And again, I think that heat is part of the reason we're seeing some hand-shelled moistures at fairly low numbers here in mid-September.
I always like to look at the precipitation update, and like you alluded to, Jim, as far as last year, we did grow a pretty darn good corn crop with the lack of moisture that we had, but I really feel like it came at timely times. This year with that heat, that's gonna change some things there. But as you can see, the precipitation totals, the far northwest Iowa has been behind a little bit. Central Iowa, it's pretty right on. But so yeah, about 4 to 6 inches off there. So if you remember water usage, we still do have some fields that are half milk line, 2.25 inches of water use at that time frame is what is needed, and that will get us about 13 days to black layer. Those fields that are 3/4 milk line, gosh, we need a good inch for water usage there, and it'll give us a good 7 days to that relative maturity. As a rule of thumb, that is. And like I had mentioned, that black layer piece, I've gotten a lot of questions, how quickly is this crop going to dry down? And again, something that I've always noticed through the years, once it gets to black layer, it is around that 30% grain moisture, and drying is about 3/4 to 1% per day with that sunny breeze during, oh gosh, I'd say, mid-September, late September. Then once you get into October, it goes down a little, 0.5% to 3/4% per day. And then late October, it goes down even more. But we're going to have some really nice days, Jim, the next few days.
Yeah, it certainly looks like some good dry down days. And I guess, like I mentioned before, I think that rule of thumb of the 30% black layer this year might be a little bit off. It just feels like we're going to have black layer more in the upper 20s. And then, if we are getting those 80-degree days like we have been, I think we're going to see it drop, just like you're talking about. You get drastic difference between dry down now versus late October.
Yeah.
Well, what are we looking at here, Paige? Looks like just funky corn.
Yeah, just a quick snapshot, just some stress out in the fields, been finding that for a bit, depending on soil type and whatnot, but the plant shut down pretty darn quick, and just, started in on those leaves. So.
Yeah. Speaking of stress, looks like you got a good drone photo of a field that looks a little like a patchwork quilt.
So yeah, I took this the other day, going out into the field, looking at it. You could walk to areas that were pretty stressed, and then you'd walk a little more and it'd be green. And it's just, this perspective is amazing to see what's going on. I wanted to see if there was a pattern, and I know every year we could probably do something like this as far as overlay the yield map, the drone image, soil type. So that's pretty much what's going on here. A lot of different things, little different soil types. You could also have, differing in emergence in areas or compaction or a residue piece. Just a lot of different things that can contribute to, say, a microclimate change within that field in little spots and whatnot. But I would say in this situation, it'd probably be more so the soil type. But as you can see on the right side, as far as the corn ears, that is two different plants. And as we talked about, the differing in black layer and whatnot. So the bottom one is black layered. The top one is 1/2 to 3/4 milk line there. So we're going to see a varying moistures throughout that field.
Yeah, I think that's been said and will be the rule. Variability will exist everywhere, and especially early on in harvest, you'll have that drastic difference in moisture, and then of course as we get through harvest, we'll see the drastic swings in yield.
Ghosting. Have you seen a little bit of this year, Jim?
It's not even Halloween, and yes, there is ghosting present. Yeah, just even yesterday afternoon, very noticeable. This time of the year when we've got a lot of other plants that are still green and healthy, then these stand out like a sore thumb. Very much early death. Typically diplodia. Sometimes it's fusarium, crown rot that'll cause this. Diplodia will tend to have a little bit more of a gray cast to it, or there'll be some speckles on the lower part of the stalk. But to really distinguish, you almost have to send in a sample to tell for sure. The fusarium crown rot, I mean, like the name suggests, it usually will be more of a rot right in that crown area. But there's a fair amount of this starting to show up. We see it every year. I don't know as if I would say it's worse this year. I haven't necessarily seen any wide scale issues. More of the early death and senescence is still stress related. But I would be watching this, because if we start seeing a high percent, you start seeing over 1% of the plants like this, that's suggesting there's an issue going on or some hybrid susceptibility, and may need to look at scheduling that field for early harvest.
So one other thing to add real quick on that, there's a lot of different things that can bring this on. Ghosting can be from cumulative effects such as the heat stress coupled with, the moisture deficits that we had this year. But, other things too, this plant could have had just a little shallow planting, in that area where there's poor root development, or even corn rootworm feeding. We're still finding corn rootworms flying around, and we do know that they did their thing out there. So that could be a possibility as well. But I would definitely say now is a really great time to go out, walk your fields, do some push tests, pinch tests, look at that stalk health out there in general, and see what you find. Develop that harvest plan.
When you're doing a push test page, what do you generally use as a rule of thumb as far as kind of a red flag that's going to get your attention on wanting to get that field out early?
So my red flag is around that 15%. I don't want any to push over, but I know at some point that's just kind of what happens. But 15 to 20%.
Well, the good thing is in Northwest Iowa, the wind never blows, right? So we don't have to worry about that. Yeah, even some storms here over the last week, we've seen some of these dead senesced areas that are starting to kink over. So yeah, stock quality, stock health definitely is a concern for all of us, and obviously where there's stress areas, those are the areas to really focus on.
Yep. I get a lot of questions every year, actually. Are we going to see some ear molds? We can see ear molds in dry years, we can see them in wet years. And there has been a lot of insect activity out there, such as stink bugs, sap beetles, corn rootworm beetles, just chewing on those kernels and opening up sites for disease. So cladosporium is likely the one to the left. It's a black mold, and it does, it's more prevalent in dry years. And then the ear to the right, it could possibly be fusarium. I saw a little bit of pinkish salmon color in there, but the one that we kind of worry about is aspergillus, and that is a mycotoxin, and that is quite common in dry, warm years. But gosh, things have kind of been really dewy and cooler, so hopefully that doesn't come about. But what about you, Jim? Do you typically see ear rots every year?
Um, fortunately, unlike the Eastern Corn Belt, we don't tend to have the real disastrous diplodia ear. You certainly can find them here and there, but like you were mentioning with the insect feeding, most of what I see is started by an insect.
Yep.
Like the picture on the right, stink bug could have easily gotten in there. You can see some of these kernels that are actually damaged, and then usually that's just an entry point for a little bit of infection, but it's really not a true, diplodia or fusarium ear rot where it's taken the whole ear. Especially once we get to this time of the year and we're starting to get the starches harden, and once we get to black layer, then usually we don't see those molds develop unless we just set in and are extremely wet for long periods of time. But most of what I'm seeing is brought about by the insects, like you were mentioning.
I did walk a few fields that had some very interesting kernels. We do see this every year, actually, and it can be due to a few different things. But if you see, say, this black kernel cap or discoloration on the top half, as far as the ear, likely that is a stink bug feeding. But if you see it sprinkled all over, it's genetic, and it's similar to that non-disease mimic lesion. This is very interesting because it had been, there's one hybrid that I had noticed it in mainly, so it had to have been a hybrid genetic thing. So basically the corn has this unique fertilization with pigmentation in that alurone layer, the pericarp, also, so that outer coating of that seed. So the position of the genes can randomly jump, and it can be evident in that pigmentation as you see here. And it kind of reminds me of Indian corn, how that occurs. That does have gene jumping as well. But again, no concern. I've talked to, elevators and whatnot, and they take it because it's just a discoloration on that pericarp area. It doesn't go through the seed.
Yeah, it seems like usually, again, as the kernel dries down, shrinks back a little bit, it's not quite as noticeable. So it does bring up questions though every year.
Yes. Yeah, this is.
I've heard just a little talk about tar spot.
Yeah, it's been a hot topic this year, Jim. Gosh, last year it came in super late, and this year it came in a little earlier. So this is in my neck of the woods as far as Calhoun County. That first picture, July 18th. There's one lonely lesion on there, and I had to look and look and look to even find, anything like that out in the field. So the same field, same plant, August 23rd. You can, if you look real close, you can kind of see how things were progressing. And then here we go, September 12th, that last leaf. And so it's been interesting because we do know that there's like a 3-week latency period where that plant could be infected, and you won't see the symptoms appear, until 4 weeks later. And it's just that the conducive environment, that daily leaf wetness, 7 hours of daily leaf wetness, moderate temperatures. But right now, a lot of these fields are half milk line, if not more. A lot of them are past that. So, if it comes in early, it can reduce that ear weight and kernel fill. But gosh, I really don't see it being a huge issue in my neck of the woods. Again, it depends on when it came in, but these fields aren't decimated, like completely dead. So I think maybe it's something that we're going to have to keep thinking about every year, because that inoculum can build up so quickly out in the field.
Yeah, and it still seems to be an east to west split as they go
Yeah.
west in northwest Iowa. There still seems to be very little tar spot seen. But you're right, it does need to be something that we have to have on the radar and note late season, especially as these plants again start to senesce and lose some of their
Yeah.
natural tolerance. It can start to show up a lot heavier when those plants are dying. And then, of course, some of the other diseases, we mentioned this earlier, but northern corn leaf blight, another disease that kind of likes to come in when the plant is shutting down or getting towards natural maturity. Paige and I were in a plot yesterday where it was fairly widespread. You could find it on most hybrids, but I don't think it was affecting yield. But if you do see it take over a lot of green tissue here over the next week or so, certainly a chance it could affect standability.
Yep. And then common rust. Common rust is that brown to brownish red, elongated, scattered lesions. It likes that 61 to 77 degrees out there. I do get a lot of questions on southern rust. Again, that one does not overwinter in Iowa. It blows in from the south, and it's more so the orangish lesions, but they do turn black later on. And on this leaf there is a little bit of tar spot there, but southern rust is smaller lesions, and like I said, it kind of does something a little later on where it turns a little dark brown, blackish.
Yep, common rust, a lot more common in our area. Southern rust, we can see it, but it's pretty rare. But if it is heavy and you walk through the field, you're going to come out looking like a Oompa Loompa. Willy Wonka. That's the way to remember that one.
Yeah.
And then good old Goss's wilt, like we
Right.
had
I
mentioned
think
earlier.
Josh was just asking about,
We've got
or he was asking if it was going to be done
a fair
this
amount of
morning.
that going on, especially where we've had the wind damage. Obviously with the bacterial disease, it's going to open up that leaf for a chance of infection. It's out there again, probably not yield limiting from what anything I've seen, but it's got my attention, especially on fields that we need to watch for if we're going corn on corn. Also, if we've got some fairly heavy areas of Goss's wilt, we may want to harvest or schedule it to harvest early, just because again, affecting that standability, or we're losing enough leaf tissue up top where we're just not allowing that plant to finish naturally, and that may have to cannibalize to fill out the ear. So the standability is what I'm more concerned about just than the actual yield effect.
Yep.
Well, we're gonna finish up just showing a few pictures. Pictures are always worth at least 1,000 words, right, Paige?
At least.
And then
Yes.
Paige on the corn here has taken some great pictures, just on mainly some of the new hybrids as well as some of the high volume hybrids. But it's always fun to take a look at comparisons this time of the year, especially where we can start to see differences.
It is a fun time to see what we can find out there. And this is one of the new Smart Sax Pro 101-33. It does have a double Pro 101-35. And it's looked pretty darn good across my territory. Emergence was super. I'm thinking it might hold a little more offense than what we first initially thought, but
yeah, I've liked it a little more of a longer ear type. If you remember when we did the trainings, this was the one we talked about as far as low test weight, and I'm sure it'll be that, but actually the rough cap or the grain quality right now looks pretty decent, better than what I expected. I guess I was braced for the worst from what the breeders were telling us, but again, a little lighter test weight, but right now, it doesn't look too bad.
Well, this isn't a new one, but it's one of those tried and true type hybrids, 5218, 5125 is the double pro. And again, across my territory, it's looking super. A little average out of the ground, but once it got established, it's been really taken off, and it's one of those that's consistent down the line, Jim.
Yeah, that's what I like about it. Very consistent year to year. And we talked about this one needing a little more population because it's fairly fixed year. Although yesterday we were looking at it in a plot where it was 30,000 next to 38,000, and I was actually quite impressed with the ear flex at a 30,000. So maybe a little more versatility than what we first gave it credit for.
I think so. 10533 Smart Sax Pro.
Which do you want, the Coors Light or the Busch Light on this
I
one?
know.
Beer can ears.
This has been a fun one too, to walk throughout the year. That kernel depth is outstanding. It's got more of a wider kernel than that deep kernel on top of it. That's a pretty neat one, Jim. What have you seen across your territory?
Yeah, well, like you mentioned, the kernel depth is unbelievable. I thought nothing could rival 5665 for kernel depth, but I think this can. This one looks like it's even a deeper kernel, very girthy. And then the plant health, like on the lower right here, the plant health, the Stay Green at this point has been one of the more impressive hybrids for that.
Yep.
So you kind of think of, maybe you could go down the road of Busch Light tall and Busch Light normal. Because 5665 obviously a shorter plant type, where the 10533 similar ear type, but a little bit taller plant type. So it's one way to differentiate. I do think the 10533 will have a little bit more stress tolerance, just based on what we're seeing right now. But 5665, we know what it did last year in stress. So it's decent on stress, but it's probably not the first one I'm going to put in the real light variable soils.
I like this. Yeah, I like this one in poorly drained heavy soils for sure. It does really, really well. You can see that tiny bit of tip back. Gosh, Jim, I've seen that since it first came out in plots. So I don't get too concerned about that little tip there.
Yeah, and it seems like it doesn't matter what population or even what type of yield environment. So I do like to see this one pushed for population. Once again, Stay Green. Right now in plots, it's one of the better ones for plant health and well, overall disease tolerance. The Goss's wilt is excellent. Overall disease package, very good.
10733 Smart Sax Pro, as we know, it's 5771 base genetics, and out of the gate, this one emerged super. I really like the roots on this too. They drive down, they just drill down through that soil. Really nice anchor there. So this one has some really nice offense to it, keeping it on that better ground, and it has definitely shown to be outstanding in that scenario. So this is that one where, gosh, you look at it, the plant health looks phenomenal, and it will hold on for a while until it black layers, and then later on it'll turn into more of a stalk and an ear out in the field. The tops blow out and everything. It's not that pretty, but right now it looks really great. And this is one of the ones in my area too, as far as the consistency down the row. I mean, the ears look really good.
Yeah, I think you're right though. The Stay Green part will change once we get into October. I would certainly expect the plant to not have the intactness, and we haven't seen any wide scale issues, but this is one I would be reminding your customers about. We want to harvest it timely. Don't necessarily need to let this one get down to 14%. So it's not quite as good a stock as say 5665. Bewitching hybrid. Bewitching because it's all that's left is ear on a broomstick.
There you go.
Yep. How about this one? This is planted on a few acres, isn't it, Paige?
Just a couple. Yep. I like this one. It's got such an upright leaf characteristic orientation to it. I can't say enough about this family. It is our highest volume throughout the entire company, and it's just done really well for us from start to finish. And as you see those ears too, it's another one that's quite darn consistent down the line.
Rated very highly on stress tolerance, and it's definitely shown, especially these last 2 years. We've been able to put it to the test, but the stress tolerance is there. So then jumping up to the next new one, 11133 brand new genetics with the Smart Stacks Pro, as well as the Double Pro. Talk about top end. This one about as good as we had as an experimental in our maturity. So we know what it can do on the top end. So far, the plant health has looked good. I really like the consistency of the ear. A little bit more of a slender ear, but from plant to plant, looks like the ear size is very consistent, and I think that's where it's going to get its top end yield.
I've seen some big differences in when I've had this in plots as far as the plant health and the drought, as far as the stress tolerance. It has handled it really, really well.
And this one, in some of the early testing, had shown some very good fusarium crown rot tolerance. So I think that's going to be a key feature. And the grain quality test weight will be outstanding on this one. Excited to have it in the lineup.
Yes. 6269. Gosh, that one we had out last year in plots, and it's looking really good again this year as well. Look at that plant health on that thing. Early on, can plant it early. It'll wait for the combine. It's a great hybrid to have in the mix. You have a little bit of it out in your territory, don't you, Jim?
Yep. Yeah, it looks good. A little tighter husk cover, a little longer husk cover, so the dry down is slow, especially on the Smart Stacks version. So we want to keep that in mind, but it's kind of that ideal hybrid that can wait for the combine if we're going to have something to harvest last. Excited to see what it can do on the silage and the earlage side too. A year like this, some of the silage and even earlage tends to get too dry too fast. So I think this one will slow that dry down enough where we'll be able to keep moistures where we want to have them.
Yeah. I threw this one in here, 6390. It's done well for me in my area towards central and then to the west. It's just it's done well for me. I do like to keep it off of extremely poorly drained, but it does have a wide placement with this one.
Yep, I think that's the key point. Roots are good, but they're not outstanding. So making sure that we've got well drained soils, especially if it's a tighter clay.
Yep.
And then lastly, the 11533, a little bit more limited volume on this one as compared to the other ones we've been talking about. But this one will have the Smart Stacks Pro version. This was the 6584 Smart Stacks from last year, so technically the second year out. Another one that the roots are really amazing. This and the 11133, I would put those root systems against any hybrid in the industry. So that's really the key thing on this hybrid, outstanding roots. So that helps it as far as placement. Pretty solid on drought tolerance, as well as the ability to take some really tight clays or poorly drained soils. Well, sometimes beans get up to the end, and here we are. Just a few quick snapshots on a couple of the earlier or brand new Extend Flex, starting with an early one. Same picture, right and left here, just with a little more of a close up. But 16XF3s, limited on that earlier side, but this one will be a nice complement to the 15XF2s. So I think both of them will be products that we can kind of plant on a broad acre. But for this year, we'll still have the heavier volume in the 15XF2s.
16XF3s have great defense package to it and would be a good complement to 18XF1 right next to it. So.
Yep, exactly. 18XF1s are going to be more on the offense, where 16XF3s can balance that out. And then one of the higher volume brand new Extend Flexes will be the 19 XF3s. They're on the right, to just coming in like they should, a little bit earlier than the 20 XF1s, which, by the way, if you're looking at fields plots right now, 20 XF1s tends to be a little later than the 21 XFOs, just a little bit more green in the plant. 19 XF3s are going to be that broad fit, bring in the type of yield that 18 XF1s have, but with much better defense, better on SDS, IDC, better on poorly drained soils, and even just a little bit better on white mold. So really a nice broad fit for the 19 XF3s.
I do have a 1-row pH plot in my neck of the woods. It is in a pocket of pHs of 8. So I do have a handful of soybean varieties out there, and it has been really interesting to follow throughout the season. We did see IDC pop up this year more so than we have the past couple of years. But 19 XF3s, they did phenomenal out there, Jim, in that plot. So I'm pretty excited about that. Definitely need a good 1.9 that can handle pH.
Absolutely. Yeah, that is a great feature for that maturity, especially. And then lastly, the 25 XF3s. This will be a nice complement to the 24 XF1s. 24 XF1s are very solid in that mid group too, especially for their standability. Side by side, see they're coming in pretty close maturity wise. 25 XF3s, I think will tend to float a little bit earlier than a typical 2.5. So I think that's a good thing for most of our areas. They're going to be a little taller, but will stand just as well as a 25 XF1. So we've got two really good standability products in that mid group 2 maturity. Also see some very good white mold tolerance out of the 25 XF3s.
A little more offense on that 25 XF3 as far as needing, doesn't handle high pH and whatnot, but super excited for that one in the new class.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a limitation on that one. I do like its ability to handle the lighter ground, a little bit more of a roll, and it'll fill out the canopy more than the 24 XF1. So if we get into the real light ground, I think the 2.5 will be the better choice.
Yep. Awesome.
Well, we were so excited. We went 7 minutes over. And it wasn't because of questions, but we are certainly open for questions or any other comments before we wrap up here.
Definitely appreciate everybody being on today, and it is going to be recorded. We'll send it out to those that didn't make it, but no, it's good to be back, Jim, in front of everyone and giving them this agronomic information, what we're seeing in the field. So.
Oh yeah, well, I think we're both extremely excited for harvest and to see how things are going to do and be able to talk about the good and the bad as we go through the next few months. As we send out the recording, we'll also have the QR code for the CCA credit, half a credit. Last call for any questions.
Well,
all right, we won't beat the dead horse. We will wrap up. Again, thank you for being on. Appreciate what you do for us, and have yourself a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day. Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Yep, you bet.